Pindy.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Osquery Office Hours. It's February 2022, day after Valentine's Day for those of you in the US or other holidays, places that holiday is in. And welcome to Office Hours. Announcements, highlights since the last meeting. I don't know if I have any announcements or highlights, but I see a new face. So welcome, Joe. Welcome. What brings you here?
I started at Trail of Bits last week, and so I've been dabbling in Osquery and trying to do some small tasks. So I figured it would be useful to come here.
Welcome aboard. Well, first section of our meeting after announcements. Any other announcements? Anyone have anything? Okay. First section is kind of an open thing. Any questions or PRs people want to bring up? This is especially for people who aren't regulars here who have, some question they'd like to ask the group or something they're stuck on. Anything that they feel doesn't hit agenda, but they'd like to ask about. Now's a great time.
Is it a good time for just as I've been working, I've had a few questions around some of the basics like error handling in the Osquery code base and
now is a fine time.
Okay, well then I guess I'll go for it. So in C++ code bases in the past that I've worked on, there's usually a couple of different mechanisms that we use for handling errors. One being the notion of I've worked in I previously was at Google, and so we used absale, and so absale status and status or. It looks like Osquery has this unexpected, which is kind of like a status or in terms of a function can either return a value or it can return some kind of status, which indicates that something else happened other than the happy path, And so I was wondering, it didn't seem like that was broadly used for error handling. So I was curious, how does Osquery in general think about dealing with functions that might not return, that might either return a value or have multiple or one error cases? So that's kind of a broad question.
So the expected class is the new ways to handle errors, while the status class is the old one. And the expected class is kind of similar to the result class that you have on Rust, except, of course, it doesn't work at compile time.
And the expected class is the idea is that more code should be using it. This is a new thing, and it's just not all code has been brought up to use it yet. Is that kind of the status quo?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that makes sense. The other thing, the other mechanism that's used for handling some other errors that I've used in the past is something. It's like a check, where it's basically you're giving it some expression to evaluate, and if it evaluates to false, then it'll just blow up your program. So these are a variation that's usually very useful is that I've used in the past is called dcheck, where it's only for debug builds. Will it actually evaluate that expression? So if you're running a test and you might not have a specific, it might be hard to test an internal thing of a function, but you can create an invariant where if you're running tests, this invariant, if it happens, it'll blow up and tell you it happened. So I don't know if there's anything like that. It's basically just an assert, an assert somewhere. So it seems like there's some use of asserts throughout Osquery, but I was just curious about if there has been thought around that, or if anybody has any other ways to kind of handle those cases where there's some invariant that you want to make sure is always true. So
are you speaking about tests or regular code?
Just tests or just actual just manual testing, right? A lot of times when I've done work in the past, one thing I find useful is filling the code I'm writing with a bunch of dchecks, which are just asserts, and then when I'm manually testing, I'm feeding it a bunch of lousy data and making sure that none of those still fire, even if it's lousy data that I'm putting into it. So it's kind of the one level below testing, where testing is kind of this heavyweight thing that's always going to be run automatically, versus here, this is very light. You can just put it in your code. You know, it's not going to affect like release build performance because it's just in debug builds. And then, but it lets you know that anytime you're running your code in the debug build, then it's certain invariants that you're expecting are actually invariants. So
For testing code, I believe full-test may have something like that, a wrapper on the assert. For the rest of the code, I'd say, that's just my opinion, maybe others can weigh in. I would stay away from asserts and instead actually, like Osquery is a long-lived process, hopefully, watchdog permitting. And yeah, we try to avoid asserts, but maybe others have some different opinions.
But
I
go
think
ahead, Sam.
I'm generally with Alessandro, but I think it probably depends a lot on exactly what area of Osquery you're working at. So I work mostly in tables, and generally speaking, in table code, I think an assert is probably always the wrong thing, because if an underlying API gives you data you don't want to bomb the entire Osquery process, right? You just kind of want to say like, this data, I don't know, just go on with your life, right? So that's probably more common, and where you handle that is, I don't know, kind of up to whoever. I could kind of see places where Osquery maybe should think about doing an assert if there was somewhere around like data integrity, or like, do we think someone's meddling with the process, or like, has something just gone catastrophically wrong in the way the threads communicate with each other? But I suspect those are much fewer than the times that we shouldn't go anywhere near an assert. So I'm curious a little bit about if there's areas where you're like finding that. Maybe I'd also imagine at Google, right, there's probably a lot of microservices that are running massively in parallel. And if like one of them hits bad data and explodes, there's, another 7 of them next to it, which is just really different than, Osquery, which is running as one entity on one laptop or server somewhere. And, while an initd might respawn it, ideally it doesn't go down.
yeah, the using asserts generally, I would agree with you. You in code that's like actually released and you want it in a stable long running process, you definitely don't want asserts. And that's kind of the value that I see in something like dcheck is what I used before, but it's basically, you imagine you just have an if def, and there's you just surround it in a macro, an assert in a macro, where only if a flag is included saying like, oh, this is a debug build, will you even include the asserts in the in the compiled code. So then you're able to do things where it's like, okay, we can just start putting a bunch of things that we're showing to be invariants, which I've found in the past, it helps. It's almost like a form of documentation in the code of like, what do you always expect to be true at various points? And then because it's not actually in the final like compiled release, it's not affecting anything, and you wouldn't expect it to actually explode anything. So I don't know if that's been thought about. That's just a pattern that I've used in the past that I have noticed isn't here, and so I was curious about what the thoughts were. So yeah.
I would guess just no one has felt the need to add anything like that.
Okay.
Zach could maybe answer as a very old Osquery developer.
I don't have any memory of making decisions around that.
Like I don't think anyone's decided like there will be no debugging asserts in Osquery, right? Not in my memory, and that isn't normally how we operate. So it's more likely that just no one has found a need, and then if someone finds a need, they might be like, "Can I add this?" And maybe they'd get pushback, or maybe everyone would be like, debugging macro, okay. I don't know, but it's hard to predict. It may depend exactly on where it's being added and what it looks like. And I don't know, Alessandro probably has some opinion, and I would just defer to him.
Yeah, again, no strong opinion. It just happened that we don't really use it too much. if there is a use case that makes sense, then why not?
Agreed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of along the same lines. This might not be a super useful question. This is more of like a nuts and bolts. But we have like I was working on Alessandro pointed me towards a good starter task of porting the CPU info table from onto Linux, so that we'll have the CPU info table there. And as I've been starting, I noticed that there's like the generation function that's returning query data, right? And that's that's what's actually going to be called, I guess, when by the virtual table. So how does error handling work in this case? Like, if I find that, like, oh, for some reason, some invariant of the system of like, oh, I'm trying to read proc CPU info, and for some reason it doesn't exist, or it's like malformed or filled with bad data, like, is there, like, what should I return there? Is it just like a row that says like, hey, like, your system's borked in some way, or like, what is the mechanism for that?
Usually you just do a verbose log and then return like an empty query data. That's been the pattern.
Okay.
But it's also a little bit system and table dependent.
So I'll say one, I don't think we have fabulous standards here, and I don't want us to change them because we don't have them. But like, we don't really have a good in-band way to indicate problems with a table, right? So as a simpler example, let's say you query the file table for a file that doesn't exist. What should happen, right? There's no in-band mechanism to return like an errors column, so you can be like, oh, I got an error from that. So the general way this happens is you get back as no rows, and the table should log something to one of the log channels. Which one is a little something like, if you query for a file that doesn't exist, that's going to be really common, right? Because maybe you're intentionally looking for a file that doesn't exist. So that should probably maybe be verbose, or maybe not even be verbose. Something like CPU ID, I think if you can't parse proc CPU ID, that feels fundamental, and I might say that should actually be on the info channel. But maybe I'm wrong, because I feel like I often start on the info channel and then like shove it into the verbose channel because it just gets too noisy. So return no rows, log it somewhere, and then we can argue about where to log it, roughly.
One other pattern in some of the tables is that if the data is bad only for a column, it usually returns a -1 or something, but it's kind of defined in the schema, file like documented in the schema.
Yeah, that's a good call out too. Is so if I don't know if you had like make and model and like speed or something, right, for a CPU info table, and maybe Apple doesn't publish the model or something, so you only can get a make and a speed. What should you stick into that model? And different tables follow different patterns here. Some of them will just return null. That's a good thing. Some of them use sentinel values like -1. -1 seems most common on Windows tables, especially WMI-based ones will usually return -1 for bad data, for like no data, weird column, something amiss. I tend to favor null. If there's no data, just put a null in it. No good standard.
Okay, good. Well, that definitely answers the question. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, good call out, Charbel. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions in there? I'm just taking notes about these things. The two agenda items. Oh, we've got a couple more agenda items. Excellent. Okay, next agenda item is the 5.2.2 release. I have this running in Collide's beta fleet and have not yet seen any errors. So might be stable. Anyone else do anything with it yet?
Run it locally, but that's about it. Haven't seen anything.
Okay. Do people want to call it stable? Do people want to wait?
I think it's fine calling it stable. I mean, it's like a month or more that the original 5.2.0 has come out, and so like I don't think we have to wait for each minor release. I don't think we have to wait the full 2 weeks or week.
Well, it's not clear anyone tested
due to the-
5.2.1 either.
Sorry.
It's not clear anyone tested 5.2.1 either.
But we did to
Yeah,
the
I
extent that we
know,
found
but-
something more to put 5.2.2 out there. But I mean,
Yeah,
we are the only ones testing it as far as
Mhm.
we know. But that doesn't
Like,
change by keeping it pre-release.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm
So
going to declare it stable.
we have done it the same way for the previous releases, so it doesn't really change right now. I mean, yeah, it's not different from other releases.
Okay, should we call it stable then?
I vote yes.
Okay, I'll click you some buttons after the meeting.
Okay, appreciate it.
Very exciting. Somewhere shortly before I cut 5.2.2, Stefano and I were discussing watchdog timeouts. And it seemed like this maybe merited a slightly larger conversation. To recap, so Stefano put up a pull request. It's linked on the minutes. Here, I'll paste it into here for anyone who's looking for it. And I believe this was prompted by some people on Slack or maybe Trail of Bits customers. I don't know. Some people who were running a Yara scan looking for log4j vulnerabilities with a lot of Java things, and they basically just melted their Osquery, which spiraled out into probably taking out a couple of nodes in their fleet. Normal, like you throw a lot of things at Yara and then it explodes. So kind of we know this happens. It's kind of there. And this prompted a discussion about whether the watchdog takes too long because of how its timeouts go. So on one hand, if Osquery is rapidly consuming memory, Osquery can consume a lot of memory before the watchdog kills it. And my counterpoint to this is that if the watchdog is too aggressive, then we don't give Osquery the chance to checkpoint and shut down cleanly. So we're at risk of losing the data in the rocks database. And I don't totally know how to balance those two, but I see them as counterpoints. So is that a okay summary?
Yeah. So my point. So the thing there is that the amount of time that the watchdog is waiting right now is pretty high, and is actually an unintended consequence, because when I changed the shutdown code to permit Osquery to shut down cleanly, I had to increase the alarm timeout. The alarm timeout number of seconds, which originally was around 4 seconds, and this meant that maybe Osquery was sometimes stuck, partially stuck on some service that then would normally shut down, but it would take more than 4 seconds. And when the alarm timeout kicks in, Osquery brutally exits. So this has been increased to actually being to 15 seconds, because again, the idea was that a service, if Osquery was launched as a service, I think the minimum amount of seconds that launchd was waiting for the service to shut down was 20 seconds. So again, this amount of seconds to wait was meant for the normal clean shutdown, as with Osquery working normally. Now, the problem is that this amount of seconds is also used when the watchdog has to intervene for CPU or memory limits exhaustion, or for going beyond the limit. And this is, I find this, first of all, incorrect. I think we should at least separate these two. But yeah, I was in favor to have the I was in favor to have the watchdog act immediately, especially because on the memory you really cannot wait much. I mean, depending on what is allocating memory, you can pretty pretty fast exhaust the memory you have in the system, like in a few seconds. So even saying, okay, let's bring it down to 4 seconds might not still be low enough. So yeah, it's true that if the watchdog is killing Osquery, the Osquery working immediately, there are chances of the RocksDB database to corrupt. But again, I find that the system Osquery is running on is more important than Osquery itself, because that system exists before Osquery, and it has its own purpose. So its purpose is not running Osquery, even though Osquery itself is an important tool that people installs on the system is doing something else. And if Osquery causes that something else to not work anymore, users will rightfully complain or even just directly uninstall Osquery. So I find really we should be really careful in saying that it's fine for Osquery to bring down a system, I think.
I come at this maybe from the same place, but maybe a different place. I don't know. I feel like almost any process can take down a system. So I really don't want to get too huffy about making sure Osquery can never take down a system. Like, do you let people have shells? Can they fork bomb you? They can take down your system. So there's like, it's very easy to take down a Unix box. And this is somewhat inherent in like the way people approach that, right? Or you bring in things like C groups or U limits or any kind of external limitations. So I see Osquery's watchdog as very much an internal tool to try and almost provide best effort of like, okay, can we do the best we can do? Can we do a good job? If you need a really strong guarantee, you should probably be using OS level tools, and recognize that, you will occasionally drop data. But some of maybe where I also come from is like, I feel like Trail of Bits has done significant work to decrease the likelihood of corrupt RocksDBs on behalf of customers. So I think there's strong interest out there, in fact, in making sure that we don't lose that data at the expense of the system.
I don't know. I understand your example, but I find that the likelihood, like it's different. Another process, yes, can bring down the system, but that process that is running, first of all, it's what the machine is being like. It's the purpose of the machine. It's something that is part of the purpose of the machine, but also the likelihood of that process causing the system to go down, it's lower, because again, you are making an example of an attack, while Osquery can go down. I think it has a higher likelihood to cause those kind of issues.
There are absolutely entities that would much rather a machine stop working than stop audit logging. They tend not to be Collide customers, but they do exist. So a priori, I don't know that I necessarily believe that. And, I think that, I don't know, by these days, machine or cattle go down sometimes. Like, I would be super worried if Osquery had frequent memory problems and was taking machines down all the time. Like, that would be a big problem. But I don't feel like we're there. I feel like we're in this place where you can issue Osquery a command and it may take your machine down, and you can issue a shell a command, and it may take your machine down, and you can issue almost any daemon a command, and it will take your machine down.
The watchdog could take down Osquery, but shouldn't the watchdog be creating some sort of guarantee that it won't take the machine down, whatever that means?
Well, that's what we're talking about a bit of, like, the watchdog has to act fast enough to keep Osquery from running a machine out of RAM. But if we dial that knob all the way to fast enough, then one, you probably have performance implication issues, and two, you end up corrupting database. So there's like this trade-off of what kind of grace time do you want to give it, and how much memory spirals out of control in that during that grace period.
I guess that depends on whether problems are usually indicated by this massive spike. It could just be that spiky behavior. Could, the rapid increase in memory allocation could be only seen in certain kinds of query, right? In which case, that's a foot gun we're giving the user. The memory leak that eventually creates the same behavior might be slower. Maybe that's what the watchdog is meant to protect. So maybe it's some sort of like bug detector rather than a query guarantee. But I guess the users expect it to just prevent this behavior from happening. They don't want, obviously, this to happen. They get really cranky about it when it happens. And I'm trying to figure out, how we can control expectations if we're not making any guarantees.
So one question I had was, it seemed like the implicit assumption is that the watchdog, ending a worker very fast, means that there will be database corruption. Why is that link so strong? What it seems like that points to me like there's something wrong somewhere in how the database is getting written to, such that it would be corrupted if the watchdog timer acts too fast.
The
performance. Yeah,
well,
sorry.
the not-to-be guarantees were relaxed in the past, meaning that we do not have a strong journaling model to keep it intact in case of a crash. As Stefano was mentioning, for performance, maybe you remember when it was changed?
No, I cannot, for sure more than 4 or 5 months ago, but I don't recall the precise version. Probably more than 6, because Teddy had done that work, I think.
So you mentioned that we're currently using the same timeout values for regular shutdown and for watchdog triggered halts. Splitting those seems pretty reasonable, and I mean, arguably it would be fine to make the triggered one, something shorter than 15. Did you toss out 2 or 4, something like that? Like, that seems reasonable.
The original one was 4 seconds,
so setting it to 4, possibly adding a configuration variable.
Yeah, so you can put 0. Yeah.
And just sort of flagging this as, right, this goes with watchdog, they're trade-offs. I don't know what a better answer is. I feel like maybe you've also commented that, we just don't have good enough, the threads aren't really isolated enough to just do this as well as we might like.
No, also there is a second, issue with the watchdog. This is not for, it is connected to the speed sort of the shutdown, but yeah. So basically, you can have this is a new issue. I think I've opened it. It's 7.4.7.6, and basically. A scheduled query might not always be deny listed. Particularly,
get opened.
Yeah, particularly if the query ends, triggers the watchdog, but ends before the watchdog kills the worker. the query doesn't result as running anymore on the next run. So yeah, it doesn't get deny listed because nothing has caused the watchdog to kill the Osquery worker. And again, this is made a bit worse due to the fact that we have that 15 seconds timeout. So query maybe has more time to finish before the worker before the watchdog kills. But yeah, in general, this shows that we should eventually think of having the worker and the watchdog communicate, and so that watchdog knows which query is running. And one of the random ideas, but some of initial ideas was that the worker tells the watchdog to which query it wants to run. The watchdog confirms that it has seen that query, that information, and only then the worker goes ahead and executes the query. And then after the query has finished, tells the worker that the query has finished. So if anything happens between those two time points, the watchdog knows which query was running and can deny list it.
As maybe a naive question, that seems like it has a lot of back and forth communication. Like, why not just single thread some worker executor or something? Is this a silly question?
This is not a problem with multi-threading at all. It's just it's a matter of timing and the fact that the watchdog is another process, and so there's a race condition. So there is a race condition between processes, although the watchdog doesn't even exactly know what the worker is doing. So when it does the kill, if the kill lands when the query has finished, after the query has finished, then that query won't be deny listed. If it lands before the query has finished, then it will get deny listed. And the only way to, one of the ways to precisely fix this is to have the watchdog know which query is being run by the worker. Another way, which is still racy, but it's much less likely that the kill happens after the query has finished, is that as soon as, we add a new signal sent from the watchdog to the worker. As soon as the watchdog notices that the worker has gone beyond the limit. So it doesn't have to wait that timeout period. And what this signal does is asking the worker to save on RocksDB which query is running in that moment on a separate field that is not cleared out.
Maybe I have a naive question. Like in C++, is there a way to say only run this thing? Like how do you stop execution for something that takes too long? Like I know how to do this in Go, but I don't know how to do this in C++. Right? Because we have this watchdog, which is a separate thread, and we have this communication. We have this complexity around the watchdog needing to kill the worker thread.
Separate process. Yeah.
It's a process. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, and then there's all this like inter process communication, and like, is there something simpler?
There's coroutines, but they didn't exist.
Well, but to solve what? I mean, the fact that the watchdog is a separate process is because if anything happens in the worker while running a query and causes a crash, you still have the watchdog being able to start the process, etc. So
I guess I feel like, so our watchdog does a lot of things, right? It does, we're looking for major OS query issues. We're looking for like, did this worker just crash? We're looking for CPU time. We're looking for memory utilization. We're looking for maybe wall clock time, not CPU time, but whatever, right?
CPU usage. It is using CPU time, but it's actually, it doesn't sum up how much that query is running. that is another issue, a separate issue.
So I guess what I'm getting at, I'm almost, and I'm coming from a being pretty naive about C++, especially at this level of like, is there a simpler way to do some of this, right? Because what we want to say is like, at the start of execution, take some snapshot, know how long it takes. If it's taking too long, or if utilization has gone in the wrong direction, kill this query here, right? It's like a tiny bit of encapsulation. And I feel like there's a lot of overhead in trying to communicate these start-stop times to a separate process. But that might be inherent because it might not be possible to measure. Like maybe there's no better that can be done.
I think I'm a bit confused. So right now there is no communication between the watchdog and the worker, which is the problem. So the watchdog is observing the CPU usage and memory usage of the process and deciding to kill after some specific timeout the worker.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, it's not even so the language here doesn't matter. I think it's more of a design, it's an architecture issue. Like, again, the problem here I find is that the watchdog doesn't know what the worker is doing.
I guess
and since the worker is the one that can misbehave, it's a bit weird that it decides on its own to deny list queries, etc., because it can also have a corrupted state or whatever. So,
yeah, I guess I'm wondering if there's a way they can be more integrated without just adding a communication layer between processes.
So I don't understand exactly what you mean. So I don't think so. So since the integration you're talking about is communication in some way, because they are different processes, they cannot. Yeah. There isn't any other mechanism otherwise. Like, okay, so there are also other ways which, though they ignore the watchdog, so they are ways that you implement inside the worker itself, although it requires a bigger architecture change, kind of, or at least to change many tables. And for instance, with SQLite, so we have these tables that use coroutines, and so maybe this is what Charlie was referring to. But what happens is that SQLite asks the table to return a single row each time. And so you can insert yourself in there and add a sleep. So you can monitor yourself. You could monitor yourself and see how much CPU and memory you're using and try to slow yourself down. Obviously, this doesn't cover anyway all the cases, because it might be that even requesting a single row causes an infinite loop, a deadlock, or whatever. But yeah, this would put us in a better place, because now the watchdog doesn't have to kill the worker. The worker still keeps working. It will just take more time. Though, yeah, there are all these other caveats, which, yeah, it takes more time. So, and another existing problem is that the watchdog is not monitoring, because again, it has no communication towards the worker. It's not monitoring how much time a query is taking. So technically, you can have a query that hangs forever, and you have Osquery stuck there doing nothing. And this is something I think we already mentioned several months ago. Well, anyway, it is known, but again, with a solution of slowing down a query means that, again, the execution time will increase, and so you have to decide what is the correct timeout for the query, etc. So
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm not making any sense. Oh well.
I was curious if this is a general problem, or is this only showing up for some queries that you would give it? Like, is this just like a very general problem? We kind of see this behavior with many different queries, or is it like one or a few specific types of queries?
are you referring to the missed deny listing?
Oh, well, I guess
Or-
the missed deny listing is part of it, but just the kind of I guess the corruption that's happening from killing these things too early, or like, or I guess I'm not really sure what I'm asking.
Oh, the corruption.
I'm
So the
being
corruption
honest.
topic, I think we were more talking about. I think on the deny listing, the missed deny listing, what to do for the watchdog to correctly or precisely do that. Do we want a communication layer? Or I was also saying we can eventually do some improvements internal to the worker itself so that it auto throttles itself through the use of coroutines and things like that.
I think there are many tables. So all of the tables are, most of the tables are permanently hitting underlying OS APIs, right?
Yeah.
And most of those APIs will always be very fast, right? The timetable should never take more than a tiny amount of time, right?
Well,
but a lot of tables
this-
do things that ultimately touch disk or crawl the file system or calculate checksums or hashes based on file data, right? And you can imagine those can all take a long time and burn CPU. So there are a lot of tables that you can theoretically burn a lot of memory or CPU time with. None of them are particularly like bad. None of them are like any query against this one very bad. And all of them are a little bit more like, well, you queried the users table on an Active Directory server with 100,000 users. Sorry? Or, oh, you crawled your disk space and asked to, generate file content hashes for every file on disk. So there are lots of foot guns. So we sort of started with a specific one from Yara, which came up because of the Log4j exploit. And we've kind of dovetailed into a bit of a theory of how should this behave theoretically.
And it's not just queries, right? You have misbehaving extensions that could be doing any number of expensive things. And then you have no insight into, what those extensions might or might not be doing. So,
Okay, I guess
there are
I was
also
thinking.
leaks and, bugs. So
Yeah,
probably
I was
Yara
just
table.
thinking in terms of like if you kind of changed your model around and just kind of made the workers, like, I think Stefano, he kind of brought this up of having the worker having to manage this behavior more. And I was just thinking, it seems like in terms of like responsibilities, like there could probably be a lot done of having the watchdog just be responsible for like high level things getting out of control for like buggy workers or something like that. But then like if you're a worker or I don't know if a table would be responsible for this, but if you're a table that might be one of these foot guns, then it seems like that's kind of like one of these expected things. And if there's some kind of like global configuration about what I can do as a worker, then I feel like the worker should know that and should operate accordingly, like if you are going through the whole file system and then the worker has the most knowledge, it knows exactly what the query is, it knows like all the configuration of all the limits of like how much resources it can use. And then like presumably there should be a way to like in any given case with all that information to know like, okay, like is this going to destroy everything and it's going to cause me to get killed? And in that case, like, okay, maybe you just like you like try it, but then if anything gets out of expected parameters, then you just kill yourself or something. I don't know.
There is too much third-party code.
Yeah. Okay.
Most of the problem is within third-party code that we cannot change, or even APIs.
I think you're hinting at two things. one of them is maybe a better framing of what I was trying to ask, which is, is there, like in Go, there are times when I can just say, do this thing, and if it doesn't finish in X time, kill it, right? Like that's kind of a deeper language pragma, whereas I don't know how to do that in C++. So maybe there's no better way than to basically spawn threads that talk to each other.
Well, I don't think you need like threads or like you basically just need a high performance clock, right? And then you can just write the code to do that. It's not like
the clock has to have CPU time and has to have a signaling mechanism to the worker. So I don't know. I'm not a C++.
well, if you're doing it within a worker, I guess I was assuming like if you're within the worker and you're doing things and you can like check the high performance clock and you would know like okay how much time has passed.
How do you do that if it's an external call?
I don't know. I feel like partially the problem here is people generate or they don't write very good APIs, and so like if you have hard parameters in order to work and the API does not support your hard parameters, then it's like like you just have the wrong tool for the job. But like that's also the problem that everybody has everywhere in software.
So the other thing I think you're hinting at is that there are places we could make the tables better, right? Like you could certainly imagine the Yara table doing something where it says, okay, only scan 3 things at a time, right? Like, or whatever. We could add a for loop with a sleep in there. You could imagine doing that. And I don't know. There are places we have and have not.
I think it actually has that.
It has, and in fact, the point it's so we should kind of ignore the right now the amount of time that a query takes to run, and we should a bit more focus on the resource usage as CPU usage and memory usage, because that's a bit different. Like what you have mentioned, Seth, it's you can run a thread, you can run. We have now a sync, like, well, you could always do that, construct something like that, but now in the language C++, you have features and promises, a sync, you can launch in a sync something, operation, wait for it for a certain amount of time, and then you can, in some way, just block it, stop it. But I think right now, the bigger problem is, again, the CPU usage or the memory allocation that operation does, and you really cannot easily know it beforehand. So
I agree. Yeah. On that,
that's why I was mentioning auto throttling with a granularity that maybe helps you. So like each row, sleep each row, etc. For the Yara case, I think there is some. Well, yeah, it is not either it is in memory somewhere or it is plainly leaking it. But yeah, we have a delay to slow it down, but yeah.
I haven't looked at all of the Yara one, so it's merely the example du jour. There's also been some discussion of if you actually do want to crawl the file system, instead of just joining against the file table with some wildcards, maybe we should create a file walk implementation. But there's not really enough people that want to do that if anyone's picked it up. I think the only actionable conclusions we have are that there appears to be broad agreement that we should split these 2 timeout values. It's reasonable to have them default to different things. And that if they're configurable, that probably makes everyone equally unhappy. And honestly, I think if you put up a PR that split off maybe you did, maybe this is what your PR did and I didn't understand it well enough. If it just sets the timeout values to 2 or 4 seconds, but leaves the other ones at 16, maybe that's the best we can do now. And if it exposes it as a configuration knob, then we can let people twiddle it however they feel like it makes sense. I think there's consensus for that. Yes? No? We have 7 more minutes, And there's one item here that I suspect Alessandro added.
I added actually.
Yeah, not me.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if we have an etiquette or convention on merging PRs, especially the ones that are approved. I usually don't merge my own PRs. That's what I've been following, and I wait for other people to review it, let it settle a little bit, and then someone usually hits the merge. And someone has been typically you, and I'm okay with that. I just wanted to know.
You should merge your own PRs.
Okay.
The caveats is mostly unwritten, but here's what I'll say. If we're right in the middle of a release, and you'll know, right? There's no like subtlety here, right? If we're like, oh, is 5.2.1 stable? Are we ready to cut 5.2.2? Maybe don't merge a big feature that's not related. But if you did, we wouldn't like. We have no formal process because this isn't a problem. So let's not solve a problem. Generally speaking, I think we expect developers to merge their own PRs. The exceptions where this gets weird are people who don't have permission to. So I think you have permission, Charvel. You should probably just merge your own. But like if Joe submits something, he's not going to have permission to merge it. So I don't know, like me or Alessandro or Teddy or someone will just come through and merge a bunch.
Yeah, and I'm usually mindful of not hitting merge in the middle of releases or
The other thing that Trail of Bits generally tries to do, Fleet probably should try if you're not already, is try not to review your own company's PRs. So
yeah, exactly. We do that already. Yeah, and
yeah.
that's kind of standard.
But I think those are kind of like, I don't know. Do you have any other questions? Did I miss anything?
No, I have one that's kind of sitting there, and I kind of want to do more work based off that. So,
I mean, if it's approved, it's approved. If you'd like it to be reapproved, I could go look at it. I don't know which PR.
I feel like, yeah, we can, I think, start merging them, especially if we are okay with marking 5.2.2 stable.
We said
I was
5.2.2
waiting
is
to.
stable, so
Yeah.
Boldly forward. Okay. Anything else? If not, enjoy 4 minutes. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks everyone.
Thank you for
Thank you
your
both.
time.
Right.
Nice
yeah,
to meet
thanks
you, Joe.
for all the
Welcome.
answers. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.